So for over 400 years, millions of people have just confidently believed that the word news is an acronym, standing for North, East, West, and South.
Right, which, I mean, it sounds great.
It totally does. It makes perfect logical sense. You picture information just flowing in from all corners of the globe. But if you actually dig into the historical archives, you find out that this entire widely accepted theory is basically based on a 17th century dad joke.
Yeah, it is a truly remarkable piece of linguistic deception. And, it's not just a piece of quirky trivia. The fact that a sarcastic joke from the 1600s could morph into a firmly believed linguistic, well, it's a profound window into human psychology.
Absolutely.
Because we crave order. As a species, we desperately look for patterns where none exist. And above all, we just love a good, perfectly packaged narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we use thousands of words every single day without giving them a second thought.
Yeah.
But the origin stories we tell ourselves about where those words come from are, well, often complete fabrications.
Just completely made up.
Right. Usually because the fake story is so much more entertaining or, logical than the messy truth. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are going to look at some of the most famous false etymologies in the English language to uncover the truly fascinating reality of how human communication actually evolves.
And I think figuring out the documented history of these everyday words requires a real willingness to question our most basic assumptions. I mean, one of the most common linguistic traps we fall into is assuming that short, everyday words are actually secret codes.
Like we see a word, and our modern brains immediately want to decode it into some hidden phrase.
Exactly.
Which makes total sense for the era we live in, right? Acronyms are absolutely everywhere. We talk about NASA, we use scuba gear, we point lasers. So why wouldn't news just be another one of those? It fits perfectly.
It does feel like finding a shape in the clouds.
Yeah, and alongside that compass direction theory, there's another incredibly popular one online claiming news stands for notable events, weather, and sports. I mean, if I'm looking at an evening broadcast, that maps flawlessly onto the screen.
It does map flawlessly, but that is exactly the danger of retrofitting history to match modern habits. To dismantle this, we have to look really closely at the timeline. What's fascinating here is that the compass acronym actually dates back to a specific era.
Like when, exactly?
Around 1640, so in the 17th century, just books were incredibly popular in England.
Wait, just books? Like actual published joke books?
Yeah, basically cheap printed collections of puns and wordplay, and that north, east, west, south breakdown was literally printed as a clever bit of wordplay.
So it's just 17th century observational comedy.
Very much so. But, as the decades rolled on, this false origin story cropped up in other magazines and almanacs, and as it was repeated generation after generation, the original comedic context was completely stripped away.
People just forgot it was a joke.
Exactly. They began treating it as serious etymology.
That is wild. It's like someone 1,000 years from now finding a sarcastic internet meme and putting it in a history textbook as absolute fact.
That is exactly what happened.
So if news isn't an acronym, what is the actual unglamorous truth?
The real etymology is almost aggressively simple. It is merely the plural version of the word new. And we know for a fact that it couldn't have been an acronym because of the mechanics of spelling before the printing press standardized everything.
Oh, right, because spelling used to be chaotic.
Very. In Middle English, spelling was largely phonetic and highly localized, so you might see the word spelled N-E-W-Y-S or N-E-W-E-S, depending on the town you were in.
That completely shatters the notable events, weather, sports theory right there. I mean, if a monk is spelling it N-E-W-Y-S, what does the Y stand for?
Yaks. Yaks, exactly. You've highlighted the exact anachronism. The acronym theory relies on standardized modern spelling.
Which didn't exist.
Right. If we trace the actual linguistic journey, English borrowed the concept in the late 14th century from the French word nouvelle. And if we trace that French word back even further, we arrive at the Latin term nova, which translates quite literally to new things.
Wow, so we literally just took an adjective, made it plural, and turned it into a noun. The things that are new.
It's an organic evolution of language. It happens slowly, sloppily, and across multiple borders.
So we invent these complex codes for words like news to make language feel designed.
But human psychology has another quirk, doesn't it? We don't just force words into secret codes, we do the exact inverse.
We do. We take purely mechanical codes and we forcefully attach highly emotional human words to them.
Yes. And the greatest example of this in modern history has to be the most famous distress signal ever created, SOS.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you ask almost anyone what SOS stands for, they will confidently tell you it means save our souls, or maybe save our ship.
Both are very popular.
And it's incredibly dramatic. Like, you can vividly picture sailors screaming it over a radio as a vessel goes down in a storm.
It paints a vivid picture, but that picture is entirely a retrospective invention. SOS was never an acronym, and those phrases were attached long after the fact.
Yeah.
To understand the actual history, we have to travel back to 1906. Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, this was an era when global maritime travel was booming, and wireless telegraphy, specifically early spark gap transmitters, was still in its infancy.
Oh, I want to pause on those early transmitters for a second, because the technology itself is the reason this myth exists. Spark gap transmitters weren't sending clean digital audio. They literally generated incredibly loud, high-voltage electrical sparks to broadcast radio waves.
They were incredibly crude devices.
Right. It was raw, unrefined energy. The airwaves were chaotic, just filled with broad-spectrum noise and massive amounts of static interference.
And that technological limitation was a massive hazard. Add to that the political landscape. You had different countries and competing telegraph companies all using completely different distress signals.
Like different codes entirely.
Exactly. The Marconi Company, for instance, used CQD. Other nations had their own arbitrary letters. You could be on a sinking ship, tapping out a frantic cry for help, and a passing ship from another nation might just hear it as random atmospheric static or a standard greeting.
A completely avoidable tragedy just waiting to happen, all because ships were speaking different. Morse code dialects in a sea of static.
And that is exactly what prompted the 1906 Berlin Preliminary Wireless Telegraphic Conference. The global powers realized an internationally recognized distress signal was just a matter of life and death.
So what did they do?
Well, the German government had recently started using a specific sequence in their domestic regulations. 3 dots, 3 dashes, and 3 dots. ...
dash, 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 ... And the reason they chose that specific sequence wasn't because it stood for save our souls.
No, not at all. It was chosen specifically because it was deliberately meaningless.
Wait, really? Meaningless?
Yes. In a life or death crisis, clarity and speed are vastly more important than poetry.
Which circles right back to the spark gap transmitters. If you were trying to blast a signal through a storm of heavy radio interference, you don't want a complex string of letters. You want an unmistakable rhythm.
You want a sonnet sledgehammer. The sequence of 3 short beats, 3 long beats, and 3 short beats was incredibly fast to transmit. It had a distinct, continuous, and highly unnatural rhythm that stood out sharply against natural static.
So it didn't mean anything in German and didn't mean anything in English.
Right. The letters SOS just happened to be the alphabet characters that corresponded to that specific, highly efficient rhythmic pattern.
See, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The sheer accidental brilliance of that design. Because Morse code was actually phased out of the maritime industry at the end of the 20th century. Ships moved over to satellite communications and the global maritime distress and safety system.
They did.
But SOS didn't die with the telegraph. It survived. And it survives because it accidentally became a visual masterpiece.
It is a remarkable piece of unintended design transcending its original medium.
Yeah, think about it visually. If you were stranded on a desert island or trapped in a snowstorm, and you write the word HELP in the dirt, it only reads correctly from one specific direction. But SOS is a visual palindrome. It reads the exact same forwards and backwards.
It is entirely symmetrical.
Even more incredibly, it's an amigram. It reads the exact same upside down. So if you are a rescue crew in a helicopter flying over a disaster zone, it doesn't matter what angle you approach from. SOS always looks exactly like SOS.
Which is incredible.
It's like designing a key for one specific lock and realizing a century later that the same key magically opens digital vault doors.
It perfectly illustrates how symbols evolve to serve practical, life-saving functions. We apply the meaning of save our souls after the fact because human beings are deeply uncomfortable with meaninglessness. We want the rhythm to have a soul.
So we want design and we want meaning. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it goes even deeper. We don't just want design, we desperately want a designer. We have this psychological quirk where we love attributing massive linguistic shifts or complex inventions to a single identifiable protagonist.
Ah, yes, the eponymous myth.
Right.
We heavily prefer history to have a cast of main characters. It is much easier to remember a single historical figure than to remember a messy, centuries-long evolution of agricultural practices or medical advancements.
Which brings us to perhaps the most famous and most unfortunate protagonist in Victorian history, Thomas Crapper, the great Victorian plumbing myth.
The man, the myth, the sanitation engineer.
There are two massive, pervasive myths about this guy. The first is that he single-handedly invented the flushing toilet. The second, and the reason we are talking about him today, is that his actual legal surname gave birth to the slang word crap. I mean, it is nominative determinism at its absolute worst.
For anyone unfamiliar with the concept, nominative determinism is the hypothesis that people tend to gravitate towards areas of work that fit their names, like a meteorologist named Storm or a lawyer named Sue.
Exactly. And a plumber named Crapper just feels too perfect. You can completely see why people would want this story to be true. And these falsehoods were really popularized by a highly specific and wildly inaccurate book published in 1969 by an author named Wallace Rayburn. It was hilariously titled, Flushed with Pride, The Story of Thomas Crapper.
It is a phenomenal title, I will give him that, but a terrible work of history. The myth spread rapidly because it was undeniable entertainment. But Thomas Crapper was a real person, and he was a genuinely talented plumbing engineer in the late 19th century. He was far from just a figurehead. He actually did the work.
The historical record shows he made several genuinely important improvements to the design of the toilet, right?
Right. He did. He held 9 patents, 3 of them for water closet improvements. He is heavily credited with popularizing the U-bend drainage pipe, which, was revolutionary for keeping deadly methane-rich sewer gases from creeping back up into people's homes.
Oh, that's incredibly important.
He also improved the floating ball cock mechanism that controls water flow in the tank. These were vital innovations for public health. However, the accolade for the first flushing toilet belongs to Sir John Harington, who created a device he called the Ajax in the year 1596.
1596. That is late 16th century. So John Harington was literally Queen Elizabeth I's godson. That is a full 240 years before Thomas Crapper was even born.
By a massive margin, the timeline debunks the invention myth entirely. But the timeline also completely vindicates Mr. Crapper regarding the linguistic myth.
How so?
Well, the use of the word crap as a slang term for human waste predates his plumbing career entirely. We have documented evidence of the word being used in the specific slang context dating back to at least 1846.
And Thomas Crapper was born in 1836. He was only 10 years old when people were already using the slang.
Yep.
He certainly wasn't manufacturing commercial toilets as a child.
No, he was not. The true origin of the word has nothing to do with Victorian plumbing and everything to do with medieval agriculture.
Wait, agriculture?
Yes. The word traces its roots all the way back to the medieval Latin word crappa, which simply meant chaff.
Like the phrase separating the wheat from the chaff. We're talking about the husks of grain that are discarded after threshing.
Exactly. The husks, the stems, the useless, discarded parts of the plant. During the winnowing process, farmers would throw the grain into the air, the wind would blow the useless chaff away, and the heavy, edible grain would fall to the ground. Crappa was agricultural waste.
Oh, I see where this is going.
From a linguistic standpoint, it is a very short, highly logical leap from using a word that means agricultural waste objects to using it as slang for human waste.
So, poor Thomas Crapper. He makes genuine life-saving improvements to municipal plumbing. But he has the profound cosmic misfortune of having a surname that happens to perfectly match an already existing medieval slang word for waste. People in Victorian London must have thought his business sign was hilarious.
It is highly likely they found it amusing. But we didn't invent the word for him. We just retroactively assigned him as the protagonist of the word's history because, well, a plumber named Crapper makes for a fantastic dinner party story.
It really does. But this raises an important question. It's one thing to make up a story about a Victorian tradesman. The eponymous myth doesn't just apply to working-class plumbers, does it?
Yeah.
We do this exact same thing at the total opposite end of the social spectrum.
Oh, the eponymous myth spares no one, not even the most powerful men in antiquity. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see it everywhere.
Let's talk about the cesarean section. This is a major life-saving medical procedure. Today, in the United States alone, around 30% of babies are born via cesarean section every single year. And the almost universally believed myth is that this surgical procedure is named after Julius Caesar.
Right, because the Roman emperor was supposedly cut from his mother's womb around July of 100 BCE.
Exactly.
It is arguably one of the most enduring medical myths in history, largely because it combines imperial grandeur with dramatic medical intervention.
But here is where I want to push back.
Mm.
Unlike the dad joke about the compass or a comedic book from the 1960s, this myth actually has deep, ancient historical documentation behind it. The origin story traces directly back to a massive 10th century Byzantine historical encyclopedia called the Suda.
That does.
It explicitly states that when his mother died in the 9th month, they cut her open, took him out, and named him Caesar, claiming that in the Roman tongue, dissection is called Caesar. I mean, if a 10th century historical text says it, why shouldn't we trust it?
It is a totally valid point, and it highlights why historians have to cross-reference primary sources rather than just accepting an ancient encyclopedia at face value.
Right.
Because the Suda was written a full 1,000 years after Julius Caesar actually lived. To understand why the story collapses, we have to look away from linguistics for a moment and look at the actual documented medical reality of the Roman Republic.
Right. Let's think about Roman medicine in the 100 BCE. They didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have modern anesthesia, and they definitely didn't understand germ theory. A major invasive abdominal surgery wouldn't just be incredibly risky, it would be a guaranteed death sentence for the mother.
It was an absolute last resort. Roman law actually dictated that the procedure only ever be performed on women who were already dead or actively dying.
Wow, so it was never meant to save the mother.
No, it was a desperate, frantic attempt to save the infant or simply to comply with religious burial customs. The maternal survival rate for such a procedure in antiquity was essentially zero.
And this is the undeniable historical fact that breaks the myth wide open. We have copious amounts of documentation that Julius Caesar's mother, a prominent woman named Aurelia Cotta, did not die in childbirth.
Not at all.
She lived for many, many years after her son was born. She supervised his upbringing, she was highly influential in Roman politics, and she lived to see him become a prominent figure.
So it is medically and historically impossible for Julius Caesar to have been born via this procedure while his mother survived to raise him.
So the Suda was basically retrofitting a miraculous birth story onto a legendary historical figure. It's ancient propaganda designed to make a leader seem almost godlike from his very first breath.
Exactly.
So if he's not the source of the name, where does the word Caesarean actually come from?
Well, when we strip away the human desire for a grand imperial narrative, the most likely truth is incredibly straightforward. It derives straight from the Latin verb cadere.
Which means to cut.
Yes. The past participle of cadere is caesis. The procedure inherently involves cutting the abdomen. Therefore, it is a caesis or caesarean procedure. It is highly logical, deeply practical, and completely lacking in dramatic emperors.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We've looked at 4 incredibly common terms today: news, SOS, crap, and cesarean. And the overarching theme is that human language is not a beautifully engineered bridge with carefully planned blueprints.
Definitely not.
It isn't neatly organized by clever acronyms, and it isn't shaped by perfectly timed inventions by people with deeply ironic names. Language is a messy, centuries-long game of telephone involving Latin verbs, French adjectives, medieval agricultural husks, and early electrical telegraphs.
And that messiness is exactly what makes studying language so rewarding. It reflects the chaotic, overlapping reality of human history, not an idealized version of it. You know, a perfectly packaged, highly entertaining story is very often the enemy of the truth. These false etymologies thrived simply because they were catchy. They were much easier to digest than the truth. It is a vital reminder for all of us to actively question the neatly packaged information we encounter in our daily lives, especially when the story feels just a little too perfect.
It really makes you look at the words you text every single day differently. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive in.
Oh, this should be good.
Well, if people from the 1600s could make a single jest book joke about a compass and accidentally turn it into a widely believed linguistic fact about the word news that survived for 4 centuries, what modern text abbreviations are we using right now that historians 1,000 years from now will completely misinterpret?
Oh, wow.
Right? When archaeologists in the year 3000 dig up our servers, what beautifully complex, totally false, dramatically profound origin stories are they going to invent to explain BRB or LOL?
That is a terrifying and entirely plausible thought.
Language really is a wildly unpredictable evolution. Keep questioning the labels on the things you use every day. Until next time, stay curious.